The World Health Organization is warning us all about disease X, which of course is a placeholder for whatever the next pandemic will be. They've been, of course, drumming up a number of scare tactics over the past few weeks, as we are hearing from the head of the World Health Organization about this. So, but forget the disease part of this for just a moment here. I think what they're most upset about and they're most concerned about is what powers, what individual liberties they will take away from all of us. Like, it's not really about the disease. It's about the power grab at the World Health Organization, at the World Economic Forum. That's exactly what's happening with these world governments. And look no further than France, which has introduced what's being called the Pfizer Amendment, which would turn critics of mRNA vaccines basically into criminals, speaking out against this. Investigative journalist Sonia Elijah has been tracking this story, has been writing about it on her Substack. And Sonia joins us now. Welcome back to the show. Good to see you, Sonia.
It's great to see you, Clayton. Thanks for having me back on.
My pleasure. So, Sonia, can you explain what France is trying to do here? And I imagine this would probably spread like a wildfire to other countries as well.
Yes. So this past Valentine's Day, the lower house of the French Parliament, the National Assembly, passed an extremely controversial bill. It was passed very quietly with virtually no debate. It was adopted by 151 votes to 73. And what it means is that it creates a new criminal offense for anyone to refrain from taking a therapeutic or prophylactic medical treatment recommended by the state based on current medical knowledge. And the penalty, the punishment, is up to 3 years in prison and a 45,000 euro fine, Clayton. I mean, it is
45,000.
Up to 45,000 euros fine. So it's been dubbed, critics have dubbed this the Pfizer article, the Pfizer Amendment. So the bill is actually, the most contentious part of the bill is under Article 4, which is concerned with the protection, it's always the protection of citizens' health, right?
Of course.
So mRNA vaccines would fall under this because they're considered a prophylactic medical treatment, right? To prevent you from getting a disease. I mean, the irony is actually, we know that they don't actually prevent you from getting COVID.
Right.
Or whatever disease will be in the future, because we know the mRNA platform is what they're going to push. We know under the new pandemic treaty that the World Health Organization is pushing, and the amendments to the international health regulations, the platform is the mRNA. So this is highly concerning because any critics speaking out or encouraging others, right, to refrain or withhold from taking this medical treatment would be criminalized. I mean, it's appalling. It is essentially a stamping down of any medical dissent. I see it as a form of censorship as well, right? You're not allowed to deviate from the mainstream narrative or whatever the state is pushing as their recommended treatment. So looking at it face value, prima facie, it looks like, well, how are mRNA vaccines connected to this? But they are considered a prophylactic medical treatment. And so it is highly concerning. Also, we have the French Council of State. They condemned this measure. They said it was a disproportionate attack on the freedom of expression. So essentially, this is an anti-science, anti-democratic measure. It is an assault on our fundamental human rights, Clayton. So I think it should be taken seriously. A lot of people are sort of brushing it under the carpet, but I think, no, you need to take note of this. It's very alarming because I see it's quite covert. They've sort of allowed it through the back door because they're tying it with a law aimed at strengthening the fight against sectarian aberrations, sectarian abuses. So a sectarian...
What does that mean?
to look that up. Like, what is that? So, a sectarian aberration is a deviation from the accepted beliefs or practices or norms within a group. So, essentially, if you're going to be, it's a divergence from the mainstream.
So if you, right,
Yeah,
if you've had some
yeah,
sort of vaccine injury in your family, you've had some experience with this, you're speaking out about this, if you're not in line with the sheep.
in line. Exactly, Clayton. And we know. So when the mRNA vaccines, so in the case of the mRNA vaccines, the risk of, for example, there was a whole host of, obviously, we know, harms related, but I'm picking up myocarditis. So the risk of myocarditis was not acknowledged by the medical regulators until months after the vaccine rollout.
Right.
So they're saying that they're championing this medical treatment based on the current medical knowledge. But the current medical knowledge at that time, they completely missed myocarditis. So they could be pushing a treatment that has a high risk
We
to
know
people's
that, we know from your reporting, your great reporting, that much of these vaccines, of course, were rolled out without any trials at all, or a lot of the data was fudged in the trials, copy and pasted to look like it had actually, they were fine. That the batches of COVID vaccines were fine when they were copy and pasted, or no trials at all, or they were tested on mice. Are there any
yes.
clauses in this legislation that says, okay, you're not allowed to speak out about this stuff. You have to be injected with this stuff. But we're also going to make sure that there's rigorous testing and trials, vaccine trials, and so forth before any of this ever hits the public.
No, there's no mention of that. I also just want to say that now this has passed through the lower house of the French Parliament, the National Assembly. It has to go to the Senate. I don't know when that will be. There's no date set. But we know under the Macron government, essentially, he has championed medical tyranny, wouldn't you say?
I think totalitarianism. I mean,
Yeah,
Macron. I mean, he was the poster child for if you wanted to
yeah,
go to the grocery store, you wanted to go out, you had to have your digital. And I was in France watching this happen, and you couldn't go
yeah.
anywhere without your digital passport and being tracked all over the place.
Yes, you had a vaccine passport they introduced in the summer of 2021. You couldn't enter, as you said, restaurants, cafes, cinemas, supermarkets unless you proved your vaccination status. And he sort of, there was such an uproar when he said that he just wanted to piss off, right, the non-vaccinated. So
Right.
this is the man we're dealing with. We know he's a World Economic Forum stooge, right?
For sure.
So and we know this is in lockstep with the new pandemic treaty proposed by the World Health Organization, which will be voted upon this May 2024, along with the amendments of the international health regulations. So essentially, whatever pandemic they will declare, whatever, all the countries have to do an undertaking. So these are legally binding documents. These two legal instruments, the IHR and the new pandemic treaty, countries will do an undertaking to follow the guidance of the WHO. So whatever medical treatment the World Health Organization is pushing, all of that, PCR tests, everything. It's just this clamping down, this very centralized, like a power grab. It's a loss of sovereignty, not only obviously the states, but our own individual sovereignty, right? Our own, for our bodily autonomy and things like that. They could be pushing vaccine mandates. I mean, this is. So I say it's a mission creep of this. This bill should be taken seriously and not just brushed under the carpet.
Yeah,
And that's why
3 years, 3 years in prison and $45,000 fine. 3 years in prison if you stand in opposition to some sort of injection or qualifying injections.
yes.
It's totalitarianism.
It's
I mean,
actually worse than that, Clayton. It's not just vaccines. So if you think about maybe it could be about a mask mandate, because that could be a therapeutic treatment or prophylactic to prevent you from getting sick. So it could come under just you have to wear a mask when you enter a public space. So I wouldn't just even narrow it down to just it's vaccines or whatever. It could be whatever treatment or protective measure, right?
right.
That they are trying to push onto the public.
So they could literally say as something as stupid as 6 feet away from each other. which was
Possibly.
based on nothing. This was their guidance. And if you are standing up in opposition to that sectarian aberration, the guidance is 6 feet apart, and you are 5 feet apart. Here comes the goose stepping police to throw you in prison for 3 years. I know it sounds crazy, but we saw
Yes.
this happening. I mean, we saw
Yes.
businesses being shut down. We saw people being arrested. This is not like a conspiracy theory. They
Yes.
voted on this. They
Yes.
voted on
Yes.
this.
And it's what's interesting, Clayton, is that it didn't pass initially, so it failed
Yeah,
to go through.
I did want to ask you about that. You just read my mind. So it did not pass initially. They
Yes.
had to change the language. What
Yes.
changed that suddenly now hundreds more individuals voted in favor of this? What was the change here?
But he said that the offence wouldn't be committed if they were able to get proof of consent of the individual. So, evidence of tangible evidence of some kind of proof of consent, then that's their sort of way of getting around it. Also, it's individuals who are already sick, who are seriously ill, right? But again, the wording can change. What about people who have who have comorbidities or who are susceptible to being ill? For example, we know with COVID, it was people who were quite overweight or who had other issues going on. They were more susceptible. So it could encompass a lot of other things. And we know that, for example, the vaccine mandates, it wasn't just pushed onto people who were very ill, it was on the healthy, right? It
Right.
was on the healthy who weren't ill. So I don't think you should just look at the wording just at face value. You have to dig a bit deeper because the goalposts can move, as we know. These goalposts can shift.
Right.
So it got reworded the very next day and got pushed through. And that was highly unusual for that to happen.
Well, thank you for watching this. We'll be watching this very closely. So now it has to go through the next round of discussion and see if it passes the other chamber, the upper house, and then we'll see what the Macron government does. But this is perfectly in alignment with what the World Health Organization wants right now: this medical tyranny, this totalitarianism. Sonia Elijah, thank you so much for covering the story, and we'll be looking forward to an update on this story. We will be tracking it closely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much, Sonia. She is the best. Read her Substack. Subscribe to her Substack. She's doing amazing investigative journalism. We need to support great investigative journalists like Sonia, please.